Syphilis, the disease of lust that haunted the world for nearly 500 years and changed the course of history. It spread like wildfire across Europe, turning bodies into living mummies. Sores and decay were hidden beneath wigs and fancy beauty marks. Even the wealthiest couldn't escape this terrifying plague. People literally lost their faces, and doctors, desperate for any kind of cure, often ended up making everything even worse. When did syphilis first appear? Could there really have been a scandalous link between natives and llamas? And how did Columbus, in the strangest way, inspire Gogol, while the disease reshaped the world of fashion? Today we'll uncover the full story of syphilis, one of the most devious and destructive diseases in all of human history.
October 12th, 1492, night. Spanish ships drifted across the Caribbean Sea, lit only by the stars. After 70 long days at sea, Columbus's weary sailors finally spotted land. They stepped onto the shores of the Bahamas, met the native people, and pressed on to explore new lands. By December 6th, Columbus had reached Haiti. The sailors began mingling with the local women. If you catch my drift, never realizing those encounters would prove deadly.
On the voyage back to Spain, they brought along exotic plants and native people, but the most terrifying souvenir was an invisible enemy already hiding in their bodies. Strange symptoms soon appeared: fever, ulcers, rashes. Some of the crew began to fall ill, and the ship's doctor had no idea what to do. And once back home, the sailors set foot on shore, and you can probably guess what they got up to. They brought tales of new lands, strange treasures, and exotic foods like corn, tomatoes, and potatoes. Yeah, thanks for the chips. But along with them came the very first signs of the disaster about to unfold. A few weeks after they finally made it back home, a strange illness started slowly showing up among the people. At first, it looked like just a few isolated cases. Or was that only how it seemed? Almost a year later, in 1494, the young King of France, Charles VIII, set his sights on conquering the Kingdom of Naples, which he claimed as his own. A massive conflict broke out, the Italian Wars. The campaign went well, and Charles's army, tens of thousands strong, pushed quickly southward. The truly frightening part was something else. Among them were soldiers who had come back on Columbus's ships. And how did the soldiers behave? Wildly. They hit the local taverns, drank hard, and slept with the local women. Then other soldiers went to the same women, doing exactly the same reckless thing, and in the end, everyone just kept passing the sickness around. The first warning signs: sores right on the genitals. Of course, today everyone would rush straight to the doctor, but back then most people didn't take it all that seriously. Then it got worse. Painful rashes spread across the body, fevers kicked in, and the joints started aching badly. The army doctors of that time had no way to treat it. Their herbs and potions did nothing. The disease kept tearing through the soldiers' bodies. Before long, it began to seriously weaken the fighting strength of the army. Charles VIII had no choice but to pull back, out of Italy. Still, it was mostly for military reasons. He did manage to capture Naples, but then had to scatter his troops across different garrisons, and they simply couldn't hold on to the conquered lands. Syphilis, in this case, was more of an added problem rather than the main one. And so, syphilis traveled back with them to France. The disease quickly spread beyond the military camps and began sweeping through the civilian population.
The epidemic spread not only through France and Italy, but also swept into Germany and Switzerland, then pushed further into Austria, Hungary, and Poland. By 1500, it was raging across all of Europe and had already crossed beyond, to North Africa, Turkey, Southeast Asia, China, Japan, and even India.
Syphilis was especially dangerous because its symptoms could fade away for a while, only to come back again later. And when they did, they struck harder, destroying the internal organs and often leading straight to death. Doctors kept tirelessly searching for the true cause, but none ever linked it to the new distant lands Columbus had discovered. This disease quickly picked up names like the French disease, the Italian disease, and so on. Every nation rushed to blame some other people for spreading it. In their deep desperation, folks tried the wildest and strangest cures they could possibly think of, but the sickness just kept on, wrecking bodies and slowly ruining lives. It spared no one, neither men nor women, neither the poor nor the rich. So, what kind of terrible plague was this then?
Syphilis is an infectious disease, and its culprit is the pale treponema. This little bacterium looks like a twisted, half-finished pretzel.
Most often, the infection can easily slip in through unprotected intimate contact of almost any kind with an infected person. And that's not even all the bad news. It's also quite possible to catch it through everyday casual contact. Later on, even through blood transfusions once those became possible, and inside the womb passed from mother to child. And you'll never truly believe where the name syphilis came from. It was coined by a doctor and poet, Girolamo Fracastoro, who gave the name Syphilis, meaning pig lover, to the main character of his poem. The author described the symptoms in a figurative way and came up with a story of how the sickness first appeared. And here it is. The shepherd Syphilis had no women, so he lay instead with his pigs. The gods were like, "Ooh, disgusting," and punished him with the disease. People loved the story, and soon everyone started calling the sickness syphilis, though before that it had plenty of other striking names. The black lion, Cupid's disease, the great pox, the Venerean plague. Almost sounds a little romantic, doesn't it? But let's talk for a moment about how this disease attacks the body. It develops in several stages. At first, a painless sore, called a chancre, can appear where the bacteria entered. That might be on the genitals, the mouth, or the anus. At this stage, the illness seems harmless. Many people don't even notice any symptoms at all. This very first early stage of infection is called primary syphilis. If the disease isn't treated, after a few weeks the sore may heal on its own. Yes, it closes up by itself. And that's the most dangerous moment. It certainly doesn't mean it's gone. On the contrary, the bacteria just keep spreading throughout the entire body. That's when secondary syphilis begins, with rashes breaking out across the skin. Fever can set in, along with muscle aches, joint pain, and swollen lymph nodes. And these symptoms too can fade away without any treatment. So once again, many people think everything's fine. But is there actually still a chance it goes even further? Yes, there is, and that's the real nightmare.
Syphilis then slips into a latent stage. The illness seems to go quiet, but the bacteria keep living inside the body, slowly tearing it apart from within.
After a full year, or sometimes even an entire decade, what finally follows is tertiary syphilis. This is the most severe stage. It strikes the internal organs, including the heart, the brain, and the nervous system. It can eventually lead to devastating consequences: paralysis, blindness, mental disorders, and even death. And so this terrible plague spread quickly across all of Europe.
The 18th century, ladies and gentlemen were dancing at grand balls, lavish gowns, unbelievably huge wigs, beauty marks, and faces caked in powder. None of it was by chance. Syphilis and the disfigurement it brought turned the world of fashion and beauty upside down. To cover up the marks from the sores, both women and men started piling on heavy layers of makeup. They smeared their faces with a thick white paste made from lead powder, vinegar acid, and other harsh ingredients.
The white lead gave the face an aristocratic pale look and did a decent job of hiding the sores, the spots and scars. And the harsh truth is, it was highly toxic, and with long and heavy use, it could cause serious skin troubles and health issues on its own, including full-on lead poisoning. Bright lips and rosy cheeks also became all the rage in that period. And not just to look lively and perfectly healthy, but to draw people's eyes away from the flaws and lasting damage on the skin.
Bright red rouges and lip paints were dangerous because they contained mercury. That much was known, but it seems people simply didn't grasp the full scale of the danger.
Ever wonder why they wore those towering wigs, almost like they were popes, and why their faces were covered with beauty marks? Yeah, that was syphilis at work too.
The beauty marks were crafted from bits of velvet, silk, or paper and carefully glued onto the face to cover up the scars from sores and other skin damage caused by the disease.
The fake beauty marks, originally invented to hide ugly scars, quickly became fashionable and turned into a lasting symbol of elegance. They came in all kinds of shapes and styles and were placed on different parts of the face, depending on what was in style. And of course, a beauty mark told something to others. For example, a beauty mark above the lip symbolized passion on the cheek, a cheerful personality, and near the eye, tenderness. So what started as a way to cover imperfections turned into a fashion statement with its own language and hidden messages. Now here's the shocking part. Syphilis often caused hair loss, including eyebrows and eyelashes. Pretty terrifying, right? That became yet another problem people desperately wanted to hide. From the 16th to the 18th century, wigs quickly became an essential part of aristocratic fashion. And just to be clear, wigs weren't worn only by those with syphilis. They turned into a full-blown, irresistible fashion trend.
People wore huge, elaborate wigs that not only showcased their status and wealth, but also cleverly hid bald spots caused by illness. For women, their hairstyles were a whole celebration on their own. They built tiny miniatures on top of their heads, ships, flowers, even fruit, decorating them with feathers, pins, and sparkling jewels.
Sometimes women had to ride to a ball sitting on the floor of the carriage just to avoid messing up their elaborate hairstyle. Of course, they tried to keep it looking perfect for as long as possible since wigs were expensive. The downside? They were crawling with lice, fleas, and sometimes even mice. Not exactly pleasant, but what could you do? Wigs are one thing, fancy, yes, but what about false eyebrows? Shock factor, they were made from mouse fur or other small animal hair. Seriously, it sounds horrifying and didn't look much better. And that's not all. Syphilis also caused unpleasant odors from sores and discharge, especially in the advanced stages of the disease.
To mask the smell, people used tons of perfumes and scented powders. Many aristocrats carried little bottles of perfume with them, just in case the situation got a little too smelly, so they could freshen up whenever needed. I can't even imagine what it must have smelled like. A mix of stench and perfume. But that's not even the most interesting part.
Animal intestines and bladders were also put to use. Believe it or not. Question for you. What do you think they were used for? Decoctions? Creams? Compresses? Any guesses? Then, at the height of the epidemic, humanity remembered and started actively using another curious invention. I'm talking about condoms. In the Middle Ages and later, contraception was heavily condemned by the church. It still isn't widely approved today, but not nearly as much as back then.
They were made from animal intestines and bladders. Yes, in the mid-16th century, Gabriele Falloppio, yes, the fallopian tubes are named after him, came up with a completely new device, a linen sheath, soaked in a special chemical solution and then carefully dried.
It was secured in place with a simple tie. Falloppio wrote that he tested it on more than 1,000 volunteers, and amazingly, no one got infected. That's how it worked. But what if someone was already infected? Surely they tried to treat syphilis? They did, and I'm about to tell you exactly how. Doctors back then didn't know anything about bacteria, viruses, or infectious diseases. So their treatments were, well, a strange mix of dangerous, painful, and more often than not, completely ineffective procedures. The most famous method of treating syphilis in the 16th century was mercury, and yes, it was really harsh. There was a saying, one night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury. Venus symbolized passion and infection, while Mercury, or what they called mercury treatment, meant a long, painful, and grueling ordeal. By the way, if you want to know why mercury is such an interesting substance and how people tried to extract gold from it, check out our episode on alchemy.
Why mercury? Doctors back then believed it helped cleanse the body, flushing out harmful fluids and toxins. But using it often caused heavy sweating, constant salivation, teeth falling out, and serious, long-lasting damage to gums and mucous membranes. Truly brutal and terrifying.
Sometimes people thought everything was fine, that the disease was retreating, but in reality, mercury was highly toxic. They made ointments and compresses with it, added it to medicines, but the most extreme method by far was mercury baths. People actually had to sit in them for hours.
Patients were placed in special steam baths for a period of time, and this had to be done in a course.
The procedure was considered very effective but extremely dangerous to health. Mercury caused severe poisoning, damaged internal organs, attacked the nervous system, and in many cases, it even led to death. Truly deadly stuff. Still, it did help treat syphilis at a very high cost, often causing terrible suffering along the way. Kind of like how cancer patients today go through radiation, or even chemotherapy. Dangerous, life-threatening, but absolutely necessary to fight the disease. Interestingly, a high level of mercury was found in the remains of the Russian Tsar Ivan the Terrible. Whether he actually had syphilis is unknown. His remains were studied thoroughly, and no definitive answer about his illness was ever found. Not a single certainty. Mercury could have been medicine, or it could have been poison, deliberately used to kill him.
Once people realized mercury could be deadly, Europe turned to a new treatment, guaiacum resin. It grew in the Americas and almost immediately became a widely used and popular remedy for syphilis, offering hope where mercury had caused so much suffering.
The resin was used both internally and externally in teas, decoctions, and even topical applications. Decoctions made from it were extremely bitter and often caused vomiting, nausea, and diarrhea. Doctors were thrilled. Oh yes, the ultimate cleansing of the body. And they repeated the steam bath trick. fully convinced that the heat could somehow draw the disease out through the pores of the skin. The resin quickly gained a reputation as a miraculous cure, especially among the rich, noble, and influential. It was astronomically expensive, and only the wealthiest members of society could afford treatment with it. But despite all its popularity, the resin was largely ineffective in curing syphilis. It only temporarily eased symptoms and had virtually no effect on the infection itself. Still, doctors refused to give up. They had a cure for nearly every disease imaginable, for colds, sore throats, stomach aches, migraines, even mental disorders, and for almost any problem the body could have. The old favorite? Bloodletting.
At the time, it was believed that good health depended entirely on the balance of four bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Any disruption in these delicate balance was thought to disturb the body and cause disease. That's why bloodletting became such a popular treatment, to remove the bad fluid and restore harmony to the body.
The procedure was extremely painful and dangerous. It weakened patients severely and sometimes even caused death from excessive blood loss. It was a risky ordeal, but nobody seemed to mind. And when all else failed, people turned to higher powers for help, hoping for a miracle and salvation.
Doctors, too, were not above seeking divine intervention. Medicine was closely intertwined with superstition. Sometimes they prescribed wearing protective amulets, reciting specific prayers, or performing elaborate cleansing rituals to drive out syphilis.
In the 15th century, syphilis wasn't just a medical problem, it was a deeply social one. Women infected with syphilis were publicly shamed, called derogatory names, and blamed for their immorality. Patients were seen as morally corrupt, punished for their alleged sins, which only made their lives even more difficult. Many hid their condition and attempted treatment at home, which helped the infection spread further. This secrecy made the disease even more dangerous and difficult to control. This was when the concept of doctor-patient confidentiality began to emerge. Doctors who could truly be trusted to keep patients' private medical diagnoses completely secret were extremely rare, and people went to great lengths just to find them. The main danger was ending up with a charlatan, someone who could make your condition far worse instead of helping indeed.
One of the most horrific and visible consequences of late-stage syphilis was the slow, painful, and progressive destruction of nasal tissue, often ultimately leading to partial or even complete loss of the nose. This occurred in the third stage of syphilis, when the bacteria attacked internal organs and bone tissue.
In the nose, this led to the formation of painful ulcers that gradually destroyed the nasal septum and surrounding cartilage. At first, patients experienced pain and discomfort. Then breathing became increasingly difficult, and the painful, inflamed ulcers would form, bleed, and fester over time. Gradually, the nose literally collapsed, leaving the face horribly, permanently, and tragically disfigured, a devastating change for anyone suffering from it. Losing a nose wasn't just a physical tragedy, it was a profound social catastrophe. People lost their jobs, their social standing, and could even be shunned due to fear of contagion. So, naturally, people began desperately looking for any possible ways to cover up and mask the missing nose.
What could they use to reconstruct it?
And what about using the forearm?
Italian surgeon Gaspare Tagliacozzi was the one who pioneered this idea and became one of the true founding figures of plastic surgery.
He developed a detailed and innovative technique for nasal reconstruction, inspired by Indian methods and improving upon them in remarkable ways. Truly incredible work for his time. The operation was performed in several stages and demanded immense focus and patience from both surgeon and patient. The core idea was simple yet brilliant: to use skin from the forearm to carefully form and shape a completely new, lifelike nose.
In the first stage, the surgeon carefully made an incision on the inner forearm, but didn't fully detach the skin flap. It remained partially attached to preserve the essential blood supply and to ensure proper, healthy healing of the skin over time.
The flap had to be large enough to form a nose that was both functional and reasonably aesthetic, matching the patient's face naturally. Stage 2. After about 14 to 21 days, the surgeon carefully detached the upper edge of the skin flap from the arm and meticulously sewed it onto the nose.
The patient's arm had to remain pressed firmly against the face for several weeks so the skin could fully take and integrate. The process was excruciatingly uncomfortable. The arm had to remain perfectly still in exactly the right position for weeks, demanding incredible endurance and sheer willpower from the patient.
Finally, the last operation, Once the skin had fully adhered to the face, surgeons detached the flap from the arm and meticulously completed the delicate formation and final shaping of the new nose. Then came the shaping and modeling phase, during which the skin flap was carefully sculpted and molded into a natural-looking new nose. The surgeon stitched the skin to the remaining parts of the nasal septum and cartilage, carefully attaching the skin and forming the nostrils. The recovery process was long, difficult, and extremely demanding. There was a very high risk of infection, since surgical instruments and sterilization methods in the 16th century, well, they really weren't exactly reliable at all. Patients had to strictly rest, avoid almost any movement, and take extreme care not to do anything that could damage the nose. Doctors carefully and continuously monitored the skin flap, and if anything even slightly went wrong, they would step in to adjust the shape and prevent problems. Despite all these difficulties and challenges, this method proved far more successful than earlier attempts to reconstruct and restore the nose. It wasn't always perfect, of course. This Italian surgeon's method didn't always manage to achieve a truly ideal result. The final outcome depended on many factors, including the patient's overall health, the extent of the nasal damage, the skill and experience of the surgeon, and other considerations. The nose reconstructed using Tagliacozzi's method often appeared wider and thicker than a natural nose, because skin taken from the forearm has a different texture, density, and structure than the delicate skin on the face. Additionally, the patient might end up with a noticeable scar on the arm. After all, that's exactly where the skin was carefully taken from. But compared to having virtually no nose at all, the results were truly remarkable and astonishing. Nothing short of astonishing, especially given the era and the primitive medical techniques of the time. For those who unfortunately couldn't afford expensive surgery or simply didn't dare to go through the procedure, there were still a few alternative options available.
Metal prosthetics, false noses made from various materials, mostly metals. Typically, these were thin plates of gold, silver, or copper, carefully shaped, crafted, and securely attached to the face.
They were heavy, uncomfortable, and awkward to wear, but at least they hid the disfigurement. The poor used noses made of leather or cloth.
But the worst manifestation of syphilis wasn't even the nose. It was the madness that struck patients in the later stages. Interestingly, it's unclear what exactly caused Christopher Columbus's death, but his symptoms included arthritis pain, confusion, instability, eye inflammation, and gout, all consistent with undiagnosed and untreated syphilis. But is it really true that Columbus and his rowdy, unruly crew were entirely to blame?
Actually, it's really not that simple. What if the indigenous populations weren't responsible at all? There are three main theories about where syphilis came from. You've already heard the first.
Columbus's sailors brought back an infectious disease from the Americas. Local hoofed animals, like llamas, were carriers. Some believe the infection spread from llamas to the native population and from them to the sailors. In some circles, there's even discussion of possible livestock involvement in the transmission.
And then there's the theory that the disease arrived directly from the Americas and was already present there. Archaeologists discovered skeletons with signs of syphilis. Moreover, it's historically documented that after Columbus returned in 1493, Europe experienced its first major syphilis epidemic, coinciding with the spread of Spanish expeditions. But that's not very simple. The second theory is the pre-Columbian European hypothesis.
According to this idea, syphilis already existed in Europe long before Columbus's voyage. So why didn't anyone know about it? Simply put, cases were either misattributed to other diseases, or they didn't spread widely.
In short, no one understood it was a distinct disease. Syphilis may have been already known under other different names, with its symptoms mixed up with those of other illnesses, like leprosy. Many supporters of this particular theory strongly believe that syphilis could have possibly originated in Europe or Asia and remained relatively unnoticed for centuries, until major changes in living conditions, climate, or social structures eventually triggered its outbreak. And then it gets even more intriguing. So what if I told you that Africa was to blame? Yes, the third theory is precisely about that. According to researchers, it is believed that syphilis developed from another, less aggressive disease that had existed among African populations for thousands of years in history. This infectious disease, widely known as yaws, was historically transmitted through the skin and typically didn't cause the severe systemic damage that syphilis does now. But the pathogen mutated into a more aggressive form, syphilis, which eventually spread to Europe across continents.
Diseases somewhat similar to syphilis did indeed exist in Africa and other tropical regions long before the 15th century began. Recent advanced genetic studies confirm that the bacteria causing syphilis on yaws are closely related to each other.
However, none of these hypotheses is considered 100% proven. Scientific research continues. The real revolution in syphilis treatment came in the 20th century with the discovery of penicillin. This antibiotic proved to be a true lifesaver, effectively killing the bacteria that cause syphilis. If detected really very early, a full course of effective treatment usually completely cures the patient without leaving even the slightest trace of infection. Remarkably, today, treating syphilis is relatively straightforward, as long as the disease is caught in time properly. Diagnosis is also crucial. Indeed, so regular testing for sexually transmitted infections helps detect syphilis in its early stages, when treatment is most effective and rapid enough. By the way, this is our very first episode about diseases. Want more? Leave a comment and tell us which ones.